The Energy Exchange Show is funded by the European Union in partnership with the United Nations Development Programme, the Ministry of Public Utilities, Energy, Logistics and E-Governance, the Ministry of Youth, Sport and Transport, and the Belize City Council.
Good night and welcome to the Energy Exchange. I am Dan Elliott and I will be your moderator for this event. Tonight's focus will be on the licensing regime. The licensing regime was proposed by the Public Utilities Commission, better known as the PUC. And in March 2024, the government of Belize approved the proposal for the new electricity licensing and consent regulations. The new regulations aims to modernize the existing regulatory environment for electricity supply, transmission, distribution, and energy storage. This allows for the future-proofing of the electric grid and the comprehensive integration of renewable energy resources. Before we delve further into this interesting topic, I would like to kindly allow each of our panelists to briefly introduce themselves for the audience. So for the audience guys, briefly state which entity you're representing, your position, your main role in relation to the regulations within your field of work. So let us find out who you guys are, starting right here with the first person to my left, Ms. Stacey Greenidge.
Good night, Dion. Good night, panelists. Good night to everyone tuned in. My name is Stacey Greenidge. I am an attorney at law and I'm the internal legal counsel at the Public Utilities Commission. At the PUC, I advise the commissioners and the team of directors draft and prepare the regulations, and I was instrumental in preparing this specific regulations.
All right, thank you, Ms. Greenidge. Now I want to move straight to your left, Mr. Dion Kelly, and we have a very important thing in common, Mr. Kelly, being the name. So tell us about yourself.
Hi. Thank you, Dion. Thank you, Ms. Greenidge. Welcome, Mr. Rosado. My name is Dion Kelly. I'm an energy officer at the Ministry of Public Utilities, Energy and Logistics. I primarily work on energy efficiency and renewable energy projects. Particularly, we have that specific emphasis on rural electrification. We pretty much just launched our least cost rural electrification plan last year. That plan takes into consideration electrifying the entire country. Of course, we know we have that SDG 7 goal of universal access by 2030, and so we're looking at interventions from line extension to microgrids to standalone systems.
Excellent. And to you, Mr. Rosado, representing the Belize Chamber of Commerce and Industry, tell us about yourself.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. It really is an honor to be on the panel with such distinguished people in the field. My name is Rian Rosado. I'm policy analyst with the Chamber, and our role in this discussion is twofold. We try to review legislation, try to make sure that private sector interests are taken into account, and then we also play a role in informing our members of things that are going on within the sector.
Excellent. All right. Well, I want to thank the three of you for that introduction. Now, I want to get into the discussion, and I mean that word. I'm not just saying that for saying its sake. I would like this to be a conversation. All right, and I want to start to make sure everybody who's watching this understand the context within which this all falls. Now, I want to start with you, Ms. Greenidge. The PUC is a regulator. I think we established that. In specifically talking about the energy sector and as it pertains to this specific issue with the new licensing regime, where does the PUC fit in this?
Yes, certainly, Dion. As you said, the PUC is the regulator of electricity. Under the current Electricity Act, the Act gives power to the PUC to issue licenses to persons who intend to generate, transmit, and distribute electricity in Belize. What the new electricity licensing and consent regulation does is to take it a step further to modernize the legal framework. The world as we know it is changing. It's transforming, and these new regulations makes that transition.
And I think I want to jump in right there in terms of the modernizing. And Mr. Kelly, you can also jump in on this one as well. Because when you say modernize, if I could be tongue-in-cheek about it, what is being modernized? What is changing?
So definitely, so when we think about the electricity sector currently, we know that it's a very exciting time. We know that we have been leading renewable energy within the Caribbean and even very competitive within Central America. But of course, that has been on what you would call the centralized creation of electricity, where you generate in one plant and then you distribute.
And I think it's useful for our audience to understand that, because right now what we have is, when you say centralized, you're talking one entity.
Yes.
What is that entity?
Well, ideally, BL has the license to distribute, but I'm talking more about IPPs, the generators. And so, specifically generating electricity in one point and distributing is, you could see, the whole way of doing electricity,
Yeah.
so to speak.
So in Belize right now, and the IPP is what? Independent Power Producers. So in Belize right now, who are these IPPs? You have Belcogen.
We have Belcogen, Fortis Belize,
SS Energy,
Santander.
Right. So basically these are the guys, and mostly renewable energy.
Yes, the majority is renewable.
Majority is renewable energy. And we also, anyway, we'll go into that a little bit later. Now, what happens right now is that's the IPP. I think, Ms. Greenidge, there is a threshold that operates right now. Can you explain a little bit more about that threshold?
Right. So under the existing Electricity Act, anybody who wants to generate electricity less than 75 kilowatts, you don't require a license. You don't need a license. You can do that for your own self-generation. So when we say that we are modernizing the electricity sector, it now means that if you want to generate electricity by whatever means, but as the PUC, we encourage clean energy with renewable sources, and we also encourage local generation of energy. So we encourage rooftop solars.
So I would want to add to that, because ideally we know that the energy policy was updated in 2023, and it does speak towards renewable energy, and particularly indigenous renewable energy. And so the support from the PUC that they provide to the country is very important, because regulation, even though it might seem very stringent, it's for your safety, it's for the safety of your...
But you see, we want to get there, because what Ms. Greenidge, you just said just now, is that currently, or I guess, is this regulation in active already?
Yes, this is a new regulation.
So prior to this regulation, if Mr. Rosado wanted to put solar and does his own thing, and he's generating, what are you generating? 50 kilowatts. And if that makes any sense, you guys are the experts, but he's doing 50 kilowatts. Would he have had to have been registered, regulated in any degree or form or fashion under the previous regime?
No, under the previous.
So the modernization is now bringing Mr. Rosado into the regulatory net, if I can use that term. Am I right in saying that?
Yes.
Right.
So the objective is to integrate them with the grid and to ensure safety, and also to ensure local generation of energy back to the grid.
And I guess that's where now, Mr. Kelly, we want to talk a little bit more about this, because what we're really talking about here, we have the IPPs on one hand, but then you also have, and we're going to keep this a running thing, so we're going to call you the Rosado household. You're doing your own energy, right?
Correct.
And the likes of Mr. Rosado doing his 50 kilowatts will now be integrated into the system. But what this means for him is that he will be able to buy and sell on the grid?
So that's what's so good about the regulation. The regulation has a list of initiatives, so to speak. Like, for example, it could be his household that he would want to connect to the grid, or a business that he has that he wants to connect to the grid.
Limited.
Correct. Right. Or it could be that he wants to be an IPP.
Okay.
And so the important thing here is to understand that the licensing and consent regime opens up the electricity market.
Understood.
Ideally, it was just the utility that would procure power and distribute. Now you can have different persons within the public participating in the electricity sector, which is very important. Competition does bring innovation.
So what you're saying here is that households, small businesses would be able to supply energy to the grid.
Yes.
From the private sector vantage point, Mr. Rosado, what is that? How does the private sector view this? Is this an opportunity or something? How do you guys view this at the chamber?
I mean, energy is one of those things that everyone is interested in. And at least the experience that I have, talking membership, while most businesses, smaller businesses, up to medium enterprises, don't know the details, the people in the sector that I've spoken to, the larger businesses tend to be very supportive of these regulations. And even so, from my understanding, the other initiatives that are going on too, because it's part of a broader policy initiative.
And that's interesting because what you're saying is that private sector people are actually supportive of a regulation that in some aspects is now roping them in where there was no regulation before. So I want to come to that, Mr. Kelly, because you know exactly where I'm going to go, because ultimately you're saying to me that if private sector, which usually is, I don't want to say adverse, but not necessarily the ones who are embracing increased regulation, there has to be some benefit that the private sector is seeing. So I mentioned earlier about the ability to buy and sell. I think you guys in the sector call it what? Net something.
More like a feed-in tariff.
A feed-in tariff, but
yeah.
there is also this net component where you can offset. Okay, can you explain a little bit more about how that would work, at least in principle?
So here in Belize, we're not doing the offsetting. So ideally, if you would, and this is more to the regulation of the new customer classification and tariff, whereby, for example, for Mr. Rosado, if he has his household and he wants to connect to the grid, within this regulation that we're discussing in terms of the new licensing and consent, it's 2.5 kilowatts that residential customers can put on their household, right? And so ideally, we see that customers such as Mr. Rosado participating in the electricity sector is a boost to the economy, because ideally it supports, you could say, small businesses, because it provides the opportunity for example, somebody graduating from the University of Belize who says, you know what, I didn't study electrical, but I know business, but I know a friend who does electrical, and so they can actually start a business and provide that service to Mr. Rosado. And so having this licensing and consent, they would have to fall in and be compliant to what the Public Utilities Commission believes is best for that client.
And these are some of the objectives that the PUC had in mind when we passed these regulations, to encourage private sector investments and to foster a competitive process that would eventually lead to cheap energy. So these are some of the objectives we.
Yeah, and I think, Ms. Greenidge, the idea here is, I think you guys use the word decentralize a lot.
Yes.
Basically, it's to decentralize the supply of power, but it's also is to basically achieve a level of efficiency, as well as cost savings. I am not an energy expert, but my understanding, and you can correct me, any of you can correct me on this, I understand that when energy is coming from the grid to their household or whichever way it goes, there's a lot of wastage that occurs. So doing it this way also helps to develop efficiencies.
So when we look at our NDCs, there's an
translation, please.
Oh, okay. The National Determined Contribution.
Yes. And that's tied to our international commitments.
To the world. So when we look at our NDCs, there's that commitment to reduce our losses on the lines.
Correct.
I think currently it's about 12%. And of course, you would understand that when you're producing power, let's say for example, somewhere in Cayo from Fortis, and you're using power in Punta Gorda, that same power, that power needs to go along that line. And of course, the losses there could be significant in terms of the usage, right? And so actually having that possibility to create power where you're using it, then that reduce that loss. And so that supports our NDCs.
Okay.
So this regulation, although you might hear the term regulation and say, well, this means more stringent laws, more stringent conditions. But then this is supporting the country, supporting the world, supporting the economy.
No, and I think if we go, and I think this is important, because for the viewers' purposes, for the sake of the viewers, let's summarize what we're saying right now. Presently, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the independent power producers are the only game in town. Outside from what you import from CFE, but they're the only game in town. We are now moving from that to a situation where average Rosado, not average Joe, can put solar power in his home or in his business, and he can sell to the grid.
So we're opening the market.
That's what this regulation is doing.
Right.
That's a good summary.
Yes.
The next thing that we're looking at now, because I know somebody mentioned earlier about solar. But is solar the only energy source that we're looking at, or it's broader than that?
It's more than that. Solar is the most common, but It can include wind,
Okay.
biomass, which is something that is currently done in Belize, which the PUC encourages. Biogas and small hydro also exists as other forms of distributed.
So it's any form of energy.
Yes.
Yes.
Now, you see players, Mr. Rosado, in the private sector that are looking for energy in other areas. You think you're saying that they're seeing the opportunities.
Yeah, I think at least the discussions I've had, and I have to add the caveat that I am no expert in this either. I think the biomass, I've heard that there's a lot of potential and a lot of interest in doing research and investment there.
Yeah. All right. Now, I want to shift gears a bit because we say we're talking about buying and selling from the grid. I don't know if you guys are at a stage where you can discuss the pricing going for buying and what it is when you're selling. And how does that work? I don't know if the ministry, you guys have that already, or is that something in the works?
So, as I stated earlier, you can say there's two regulations that we're looking at. The first regulation, ideally, is the new customer classification and tariff that speaks towards the buying and selling in terms of tariff. Then there's the regulation that we're particularly discussing today, which is the license and consent, which of course you can see that they complement each other. Because ideally, participating in a sector and having to get a license, that encourages proper compliance. Now going to, as you were requesting, the tariff. So ideally, currently under BL, there's different customer class. You have the residential, where you have the social and the residential customers.
Yes.
Then you have the commercial, where you have commercial 1, commercial 2. Then you go into industrial, and of course the street lights. Now, what that regulation, the new customer classification and tariff is speaking towards is the distributed generation, where, for example, the house at Rosado Limited, they can go and, as the regulation that speaks towards the licensing consent, it says that he can put 2.5 kilowatts of, let's say for example, solar on his rooftop, right? Now, because he's moving away from that residential tariff, he's going into a different tariff. He will be selling power to BL at 12 cents per kilowatt hour, but he'll be buying at 35 cents, right?
So
Which
if I can
yes,
just expand a bit on what Dion is referring to, it's actually a decision that was made by the PUC, because the PUC approves the rates that are effective for the public. So the PUC made a decision in April of 2024 approving what we refer to as a demand charge rate and a feed-in tariff, which are the rates which the persons who are licensed under the regulations will pay to the utility, and the rate that the utility will also pay to the persons for the energy that they sell to the utility. So I just want to clarify that we have the electricity licensing and consent regulations, which sets out the different activities that you require a license, and then we have a decision that the PUC made which sets out the rate which these persons will pay. So as Dion said, it complements, it correlates, but just to note that it's a decision that the PUC made.
And you can correct me if I'm wrong, right? Because I've heard conversations about the rates. You sell about 13 cents, I believe, per kilowatt hour. Is that correct?
12.
Or 12?
So the current effective electricity rate, the average rate is 40 cents per kilowatt hour. The way that rate is designed is 25 cents accounts for the energy cost, variable energy costs, and 15 cents accounts for fixed costs, which includes the assets of the grid, the infrastructure. Now, when you, as a person who is licensed, who becomes licensed under these regulations, when you begin to generate your own energy, you no longer will pay the 25 cents. So you save the 25 cents. But your appliances in your home will still require the grid. That is why you're referred to as grid tied. At some point when you are not relying on your energy, you will rely on the grid. there is that there's that fixed cost that remains, which I said is 15 cents. But the current feed-in tariff, which the PUC has approved, is 13 cents. So it's 2 cents lower than the actual fixed cost. So 13 cents is the feed-in tariff, and the demand charge rate that we have approved is $30.
Okay. So that translates in what? I'm saving money. Is Mr. Rosado saving money? Is it a trade-off? Or he's winning on the side of efficiency and lower cost because he's using more renewable energy that he's generating on his home? What does this translate to?
Definitely. So it's very important to put it into context. Energy efficiency and renewable energy should always be put into the same basket. Shouldn't be separated. And so what I have always advised people to do is, before you look at doing any type of renewable energy projects, look at your energy efficiency. Reducing your demand.
For the benefit of the audience, when you say efficiency, you're talking about looking at where there's wastage.
Correct.
All right?
Correct. So when you would want to define energy efficiency, you would define it in the simplest way to say that you're getting the same output but with less input.
Yes. For households, I think, and they talk about even where you could design your homes to make
Correct.
it more efficient.
Correct.
And elaborate a bit, like you can
So you have something called passive efficiency, whereby you don't go and directly touch your energy consumption. You would deal with probably your building structure.
Correct.
So for example, instead of building your house out of cement, and then you have a metal roof, and then you don't put that barrier to stop the heat from coming in, you would put that barrier. And so you would have what you'd call a low cost energy efficiency initiative.
Okay.
And then that would support you, because what happens now is that, as Ms. Green said, that the minute you depend on the grid, then that demand charge can be affected on you. But if you reduce your demand, then that demand charge is not so difficult.
Correct.
to
So basically, you put the power, pun intended, put the power in your own hands. Basically,
Correct. The power is in your
right?
hands.
I should copyright that, by the way. That's a right. But I want to get to something else here. This is part of the national energy policy,
Yes.
right? Coming from the ministry. Now, how does this tie in with the policy?
Okay, so first of all, when we think about the policy was updated because the first policy was created in 2014. And so we decided 9 to 10 years later, it was very important to update that policy because times change. And so ideally, as I said earlier, Belize has been leading in renewable energy in CARICOM and is very competitive in Central America. But of course, if we want to keep that status, we need to be innovative. And being innovative means being resilient. And how do you be resilient? You have a country that controls its narrative. Ideally, we depend a lot on CFE. And of course,
Realistically,
realistically, we depend a lot on CFE. And so, being more independent is very important.
And I think I want to pause right there because I believe we need to take a break to go, and then we come back after the break to the second segment, because I think we want to pick up right there, because energy independence is a key goal for especially small developing economies like everybody, but small developing economies like ourselves. So with that, I say that we take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue this conversation on in terms of energy and the new licensing regime.
Welcome to the new era of commuting. Introducing the 501 Transit app for navigating public transportation. Commuting across Belize? For those working late shifts and early mornings. For those who are always on time or running late. For the future and the new dreamers. Serving all the people of Belize, leaving no one behind. For those with mobility needs, we adapt to fit your lifestyle, making your routine smoother so you can enjoy every moment and create lasting memories. With the 501 Transit app, you will be able to plan and navigate with ease for a better and sustainable Belize.
Welcome to Belize Travel I Declare. Introducing the Belize Travel Digital Interface, a modern online tool designed to make your entry and exit into Belize smoother, faster, and more efficient. Available in both English and Spanish, this platform allows you to complete and submit your arrival and departure forms digitally with just a few clicks, ensuring seamless navigation through the process. Designed for all Belizeans and visitors, the Belize Travel I Declare interface ensures a modern, streamlined journey in and out of Belize. Upon arrival at the airport, simply present your QR code at immigration or customs. No more waiting in line for paperwork. It's quick, easy, and hassle-free. Belize Travel I Declare. Make your journey easier, faster, and more enjoyable.
I ride the e-bus on a regular basis. It was comfortable. I found it clean, and I found the conductors, they are very helpful and friendly. And to me, it's safer for the elderly.
The e-bus make it easier to get around the city, especially when I'm kicking out my mom. The e-bus is the only bus that is wheelchair friendly, and I am very grateful that they introduced the e-bus to Belize.
I like that the e-bus is clean, comfortable, and dependable. The overall experience is better. What makes it convenient for me as a student is that you can charge your phone and use the Wi-Fi all while riding the bus.
So some of the services that I like about the e-bus is that it's green and it's clean, zero emissions, we're not destroying the environment. It's nice, cool, and very convenient.
All right, now welcome back to the Energy Exchange, and we are having quite the exchange here on set. It's a empowering, not playing words. I'm gonna keep on going and see how 2 points, right? You have the power of your own supply in your own hands. The power is in your hand. I'm keeping these puns. But welcome back. The conversation so far, just in case you're just joining, we want to make sure that you understand what we're talking about here. There's a regulatory environment for energy, right? That existed for years. It's regulated by the Public Utilities Commission, the PUC, and we're making some changes that change the lay of the land, so to speak. You have these abbreviations like IPP, Independent Power Producers. These are your Belcogens, your SS Energies, your BCOLs, and whatnot that are generating energy, usually renewable energy from biomass, hydro. They sell it to the national grid, and that's the stuff that comes to your house, and you get to turn your light on and enjoy your TV or whatever it is you're watching. The new licensing regime, and you guys can tell me if all of this summary is wrong, basically coming from the PUC, the regulation is now going to open up the market to allow individuals, whether households or small businesses, below a certain threshold, to be able to sell energy. They're called grid-tied distribution. They're going to be able to sell energy to the grid. Did I get all of that correct?
Yes.
What did I miss?
They will be able to generate their own energy for their consumption,
Okay.
and any excess can be sold
Thank
to the
you.
grid.
All right, that's why you guys are the experts, right? The surplus, the excess can be sold to the grid, right? And I think just before the break, we were talking about how the selling rate is about 13 cents.
13 cents
13
is the feed-in
cents
tariff.
is a feed-in tariff, right? That goes to the grid. Now, You told me, Ryan and Mr. Rosado, that the private sector views this as a positive thing,
Yeah.
right? Even though, because there was no regulation that applied to persons that were producing their own energy below 75 kilowatts. But now we're talking about regulation applying to those people. It's an investment opportunity from what I'm gathering from you. That's how it's being viewed, correct?
Yeah.
It's an investment opportunity. Do you foresee, from your experience as a policy analyst, that there's anything that may raise a red flag, or what you guys are keeping on monitoring on, or for right now you're just working with the ministry?
I mean, I think right now we're just working with the ministry. I think no one I've spoken to has any objections in principle to any of these initiatives. Of course, there are questions about, for example, the fees and the rates. But I mean, the questions like those will always exist. You want to satisfy everyone all the time with that.
That is true. That is true. And so now I want to pick up where we left off just before the break, because I know, Mr. Kelly, we were with you, right, where we're talking about energy independence. And I want to do something that, just in case there's a viewer out there that doesn't understand why energy independence matters, where do we get, I think, you can correct me if it's 50% or if it's just below 50%, where do we get a large chunk of our energy, and why does energy independence matters? And then we revert back to how what we're talking about with this new regime, how those fit in.
So I think when we think about energy independence, we need to put into context climate change.
Okay.
So from year to year, the amount of power that we would request from CFE Mexico varies anywhere between 40 to 60%. And that really is dependent on climate change.
Correct.
If we have a good year, and what we would term as a good year is that our hydros are performing, the biomass is producing, and so that 60% that we would request from Mexico would probably do down to 40. But now, like for example, we would put into reference 2019, whereby we had a severe drought, and of course our hydros were constrained, then that was bumped up to about 60%. And so that really puts us at a serious disadvantage, because we understand that when you're competing in the international platform, electricity plays a big role. So now if your electricity supply is compromised, then your ability to compete in this global village reduces. And so ideally, to me, our mantra should always be that we control our own destiny. So when we look at the current IPPs, of course, they are playing their role. And of course, the government has major plans going forward. We know about the 60 megawatts being procured through the loan from the Saudi government.
Right.
Of course, the 40 megawatts of battery that's also coming onto the grid. Those are what we'd call very elemental components for the electricity sector going forward. But of course, we want complementary systems as well. And so ideally, understanding our context that we have what you'd call a radial grid.
Another word that's too big for me in this energy sector.
So I'm going to break it down.
Okay, break it down.
But it's kind of self-explanatory when you think about radial, that ideally we have the grid that runs from up north. If you would want to say start from Xulha in Mexico, where we buy our power from CFE, and it comes down through the majority of the coastline, reach down to Mascal, come to Belize City, and then you could say there's another major line from the dams from Fortis that comes down again to Belize City, and then there's another line that goes down to the south, right? And so ideally you could say we have 3 main tranche of lines, or even 4 if you count the line that goes to San Pedro. And so if any of these lines would be compromised, then we could have an issue in terms of our generation base and our load centers. And so having that ability to be able to produce power where it's being consumed on a large level is very important. But of course, bringing in a regime in terms of licensing and consent, this brings more stability and standard to a grid that's already existing. And so as we move forward as a country and we want a smart grid, then having that licensing and having persons understand that these are the conditions that you need to abide by for you to connect to the grid, and be a part of the electricity sector is very important.
And I think the smart grid you're referencing or alluding to technology.
Definitely.
Because I've been
Definitely.
I've been trying to read up on this subject because, you know, knowing the show coming along, and I've seen where other jurisdictions use smart grid net metering technology to try and keep up, because you're talking now a few IPPs to now several dozens of households potentially. How do you monitor that? So are we investing in the technology? Does the regulation, for example, make it easier for this in terms of investing in the technology? Does it envision any of that, or that's something that's coming later?
So that's something that's definitely coming later. At the PUC, we have seen the submission being made for the rollout of the smart meters. In our current FTRP, which recently concluded full tariff review proceedings, we had actually approved with certain conditions the rollout of the smart metering project. And so once that process concludes, the smart meters will then be deployed throughout the country.
I want to add to that smart meter deployment, because ideally, when we look at the licensing and consent regulation, it also supports the utility to categorize different potential or already existing customers, and having that ability to understand how much customers within a certain bracket, then that brings the potential to the government to say, you know what, within this bracket we have X amount of customers, we can provide this type of incentive. So having targeted policies because of this data that's being collected from different stakeholders is very important.
But then, so now coming back, because earlier when you were talking about independence, you talk about damage to the grid themselves, the channels through which they enter the country. You talked about climate change, but every country have their own national agenda as well. Mexico has their own demand for energy, and if their demand conflicts with supplying us, that in itself, would you agree, is something that is putting us at risk for having potential losses, or downtimes, whatever the term is that you guys use in energy, where we still it makes more sense for us to have more access to more local supply?
Definitely. So I think when you look at the energy sector, you can break it down into as simple as the electric sector as well. So energy is broad, electricity is more specific. Let's talk about electric sector.
Thanks.
If we look at the if we look at the electric sector as a puzzle, we see that there are various components required to see the bigger picture. First of all, the regulatory environment that the PUC is currently setting up is very important, because then anybody who wants to participate in the market understands the conditions that they need to have. That's one thing. Having the technical and human capital to move this process forward. What process are we talking about? The ability to install these systems, the ability to maintain these systems, the ability to ensure that these systems are safe. That's also something that the government wants to work on. And so I want to highlight that last year, in our energy month, in November 2024, we signed a memorandum of understanding with the University of Belize to create an energy center. We see this energy center as a game changer, because as what we would know, that the majority of developed countries have gotten innovation through their academic systems, through the universities. And why can't we as a developing country do the same? So the energy center has already received a 10-year business plan. Currently, we're looking at that to see how we can actually implement that plan. And we're hoping with regional and international partners, we'll be able to do research and development in the renewable energy field.
Okay.
That would be a game changer. We also would want to see certification for persons dealing with renewable energy, particularly solar, for example. So that would give more confidence to investors to know, you know what, if I invest in Belize, they have that human capital to move my project forward.
So ultimately, what I'm hearing, among all the good things, the purpose of the regulation, is it fair for me to say that a large part of the purpose of the regulation is to standardize and to make sure that everybody is operating under the same criteria so that they can have less complication feeding to the grid? Would that be a fair summation?
That's a fair analysis, yes, because as Dion mentioned, safety is one of the main components. When you have your rooftop solar integrating with the grid, we as the PUC, we want to ensure that that is done in a safe manner. And I like that he brought that up, because we have, as we speak, we have further regulations currently being drafted by the PUC. Interconnection, the grid code is currently in process. So we will have more of these discussions to come as further regulations are being developed, and they all intertwine and correlate with each other.
Okay. Again, so it's about standardization. Now, I want to hear from you, Mr. Kelly. How does the ministry plan to leverage this new regime?
So, like I said, it's very important to understand that policy, for example, the updating of new energy policy can be very broad, right? So you see, for example, particularly with our NDCs, again, National Determined Contribution, we have a goal of 75% renewable energy on the grid, right? What does that mean for the country?
And that's a goal for 75%. Right now, where are we? I think we're about 50, give or take.
More or less. Right? But of course, with the 60 megawatts on the Saudis, we want to launch the latest request for proposal, the RFP. We're looking to add somewhere around 150 to 180 megawatts per within the next 4 years.
Request for proposals. Right?
Yes.
You guys, you love your abbreviation.
Yeah, but I spell it out that time.
Right? But yeah, so the goal, the timeline on that goal?
Well, that's a 2030 goal.
That's a 2030 goal. All right. Do you see any chance that we are going to meet that before?
I think we should surpass it.
Surpass it?
We should definitely surpass
Excellent. Right? So basically, it's the government is using this to leverage to help us reach that goal. That's basically what I'm hearing.
So it's not just to reach that goal, but you have to understand that whenever you make a decision, it needs to be a least regret decision. Sometimes you don't want to think about it within cost to say, you know what, this is the cheaper way to go. But then when you look at if it's a least regret, maybe 5 years from now, that cheaper way will cost you. You need to ask yourself, if I go the cheaper way right now, what will it cost me in the future? And so looking at a least regret situation for Belize, ideally is one, to open up the market, to have more competition, to have innovation, and to have standardization.
Okay. Now, I think one of my last questions, because we're going to ask in this segment, this stuff is expensive, right? Rosado Limited or Rosado Household putting in solar, putting in a micro hydro plant, whatever it is that he wants to do. If next thing you know, he's doing a wind turbine. I don't know what you're envisioning in terms of what you want to do.
A lot of potential.
All of these potential are there, but what support mechanism is the government and the ministry in particular planning to put in place to help move this forward for the players in the industry on all sides?
So there's already 2 initiatives that I could say that I believe is a very good incentive. We know that renewable energy systems are not made in Belize, which of course in the future we'd want to see that maybe through the energy center we can actually have maybe a solar panel being created in Belize, right? And so ideally you have to import these stuff. Right
ideally.
now, go ahead.
No, you're saying ideally, realistically, that's currently what
realistically,
Realistically,
you have to import these renewable energy systems. And so looking at importation, if you import a complete solar PV system, for example, the duty is 0. Whereas if you import a panel, it's just 5% duty. And so there's already that incentive. And yes, I do agree that maybe more incentives can be done, but that will come in time, right? And so then, to Mr. Rosado's point, maybe he would want to invest in a renewable energy system, but does not have that upfront cash, right? So then we have the support from the DFC, Development Finance Corporation, whereby they're promoting their green loan at 6%. He can go in, and I know they have their connections with different renewable energy installers. And so that gives a level of confidence to him as well that these are persons out there who have done this before and so understand how the payback period could be, which I think is very important for him.
Okay. So that's support number 1. Development Finance Corporation.
That's support number 2.
What's the first one?
the importation at 0% duty.
The duty.
Yeah.
So tax incentive and financing.
Yes.
I think those are good points to close on as we go to the next break, and then we will pick up this conversation. Mr. Rosado, in the other side's conversation, definitely want to hear more about what the private sector is looking at when it comes to this. But for now, we'll break, and when we come back, we'll continue this conversation on the energy exchange.
Belize is on the verge of a transformative breakthrough. The e-mobility project, an ambitious initiative aimed at revolutionizing our transportation and infrastructure systems, is now nearing completion. Today, we dive into the heart of this project to explore its objectives, challenges, and impact on the lives of Belizeans.
It has been an incredible project for us, an important milestone. This was initially introduced in Belize City, and we are very happy with the response we've gotten from our citizens.
It took about maybe 4 or 5 months for implementation, and once it was implemented, the people of the city really appreciate the transformation, the upgrade, and they enjoy riding these buses. We are partnering with the Ministry of Economic Development to put proposals together to seek funding from friendly agencies across the world. Some of those agencies are the European Union. UNDP is our implementing partner, and we are hopeful that within the next 2 or 3 years we can see a significant amount of buses coming back into Belize, maybe 50% of our fleet.
The primary objective of the project is to transform Belize's public transport sector by enabling low-carbon transport. The specific type of low-carbon transport that we're piloting in Belize is electric buses.
For the first time, people traveling from district to district will be able to travel in an electric bus, lowering the use of fossil fuels, reducing our carbon footprints.
This is a pilot project that's testing out the technology within Belize's sector. The idea is then that we're going to upscale and move towards importing 73 to 75 electric buses to the country. So the information and data and research that we gather from this pilot project would then feed into that upscaling, ensuring that we have a clear and defined action plan to move the country towards that plan.
Funded by the European Union (EU) and supported by a team of dedicated stakeholders and partners, the United Nations Development Programme (UNDP), the Ministry of Public Utilities, Energy, Logistics and E-Governance (MPU-ELE), the Ministry of Youth, Sport and Transport, and the Belize City Council (BCC). The e-mobility project tackled critical issues from improving road networks to creating sustainable solutions for future generations.
It impacts not only our energy use, but it also impacts our mode of transportation. It will provide our citizens with a cleaner, smoother ride from district to district.
The most significant achievement of the project so far is the social impact. We've reached over 66,000 commuters in less than 4 months, and we've received only positive comments from them. This includes serving some of the most vulnerable populations in Belize City, including the elderly, the disabled, children, and students.
The staff and the drivers for the e-mobility project have really adapted well. They have done everything from first aid training to public relations training to learning about new technologies, learning much more about EVs and electric motors and how to use them and maintain them properly.
This is a pilot project, so that means that we're just testing it out in its initial stage, and the idea is that we're going to upscale. Based on the information and data that we collect from the pilot, it would then inform how we upscale this project. The idea is that we want to transition the country fully to low carbon transport.
In terms of planning for either replication or expansion of the project, the Mayor and the Belize City Council are very hopeful to have, after this pilot project, a significant expansion to serve more of Belize City, and of course with the integration of current bus operators.
The most significant achievement is first to launch a pilot project, and then we're launching in the north and the west within another month or 2, and the commuters in the city have the experience. So those in the north and the west will also have the experience in a very short time. And what we have seen in the city, the experience is wonderful.
As Belize looks ahead to a brighter and more connected future, the e-mobility project stands as a testament to what can be achieved through vision, collaboration, and determination. This is more than the end of a project, it's the beginning of a new era for Belize.
For our commuters and our passengers, we want to say that there's reliable and quality public transportation that you can use.
For the first time, people traveling from district to district will be able to travel in an electric bus, lowering the use of fossil fuels, reducing our carbon footprints, and giving the general public, an updated, a more modern form of transportation.
Together, we are moving forward. Together, we are building a stronger future.
All right, and welcome back to the final segment of the Energy Exchange. My name is Dion Elliott, and I'm still joined by Ms. Stacey Goodridge from the PUC, Mr. Dion Kelly from the Ministry of Energy, and Mr. Ryan Rosado from the Belize Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and we're having a very powerful conversation on energy, right? So I made the tree, right? So we're talking about energy and a whole bunch of stuff. I won't do the recap again because I've done it twice so far, but I want to bring you in on this. This is more the private sector heavy segment, right? Because the private sector, the Chamber of Commerce, you explained, really looks at advocacy on behalf of the private sector and looking out for the interests of the private sector. Now, we are talking a situation here where households and small businesses, separate and apart from the IPPs that we already know, would be able to get in on the business of energy, so to speak, either to help save energy and also potentially to sell to the grid. Obviously, that would require financing support.
Yeah.
And amongst other things, do you see the government playing a supporting role in that regard from the Chamber's point of view?
Yeah, I mean, you know better than I think anyone on this panel that access to finance a critical issue, and not only in the regard to the energy conversation, but I think there are things the government can do. One of the proposals that one of the ideas out there, at least from my understanding, is the government in different jurisdictions, governments have tried to find a way to make it less risky for commercial banks to do those sustainability loans. That's one avenue. I'm not too sure what plans are out there, but there are things. There are also you mentioned tax incentives. I think in the last segment.
Yeah.
I think, from my understanding, those can be expanded quite significantly too.
And I think those are solid points, because from finance, I think actually invoke the age-old word phrase, access to finance. That's a phrase that's been over 10 years of things that needs to be fixed or addressed. And from the financial standpoint, you are right, Mr. Rosado, that the government can support by doing whatever is necessary to bring down the risk, whether it's support funding, partial guarantees. The options are endless in the world of sustainability-linked financing and green loans and those type of things you can explore. That is on the financing side. Now we're talking a lot about regulations today. Regulations often comes with fees. Now, are we expecting fees down the road, Ms. Greenwich? Is it something that's present or in the offing?
So the electricity licensing and consent regulations, as they stand now, depending on the electricity activity, and depending on what category you fall in, the fees would vary. For the very minor, small scale categories, we at the PUC, we don't intend for it to be a burdensome process or anything, any high fees.
High is relative. Is there any discussions about the specific fees already, or those are still in the embryonic phase?
So these are still being fine-tuned as it relates to that process. But what I can say for the small, minor self-generating categories, it's just a matter of coming to the PUC, becoming licensed, get registered so that we know what is out there.
And first of all,
we know
it's
the
free.
data. There's a small license fee associated with obtaining the license. There's a very small fee.
So from the private sector standpoint, then, Mr. Rosado, I believe, I think it's too early to say your membership have already been surveyed and get a sense of what level of fees the private sector would do. And when I say private sector, please understand, I mean private sector households and private sector small business. And I guess in this case, the household is behaving like a business. But what is the general sentiment from the Chamber's point of view when it comes to fees? Is there a general range or a general principle that you guys look for at the Chamber of Commerce when it comes to discussion of fees altogether?
I don't think we're in principle opposed to fees. At the end of the day, things have to get paid for. The question is whether a fee is justified and the fee is at an appropriate level. I haven't seen any fees, any specific numbers, so I can't, and I don't think most people can come to a firm view without seeing those figures. But that's the question: is it justified, and is it at an appropriate level where it doesn't hurt anybody?
Well said. So basically, we're talking about fees that are actually fees.
So at this point,
you don't want to trade license, you know.
At this point, the regulation, there is provision for an application fee, which is a small fee, and depending on what is your category, if you require consent to construct and operate, there's also a fee required for consent.
But the fee is a vision. I'm hoping that it would more for administrative costs, coverage of administrative costs.
Exactly.
And it doesn't become a revenue, it's not intended to become a revenue generating regime, so to speak, from the standpoints of the fees. Is that at least a fair statement that can be made at this stage?
Yes, that's
right. I see Mr. Kelly watching into the corner of his eye. You agree with that from the ministry? Or?
Well, of course, we agree with Mr. Rosado, because ideally we don't want to create regulations that hinder progress, right? At the end of the day, we understand that progress does bring a bit of controversy, but of course, when you're talking about the development of your country, there needs to be some kind of consensus and agreement going forward.
No, I mean, well, controversy, I mean, because anytime you're making changes to a regime, one of the things that you learn in policy, and Mr. Rosado, you know this very well, is that when you're dealing with policy, there's always interest. And nothing is wrong, I have to be clear that there's always interest groups, and that's okay, right? Because everybody has a different interest. And so I guess that's what you mean by the controversy, that there are different players are looking for different things. You're talking about a market. Some people would prefer certain things to go up, some would prefer certain things to go down. Some people would prefer the things to stay the same. I think overall, we are talking about something that is very tied into our commitments when it comes to sustainable development, addressing climate change. You mentioned the NDCs earlier. There's one question that I didn't present before, and it's more of an advantage. Would you agree that the grid-tied approach that we're talking about for distribution actually is something that's scalable? Meaning that it grows as in terms of the number of households that are adding on, that it actually grows that way and makes it a lot more sustainable system. Is that a fair classification of it and description of it?
So ideally, it's very important, and it's a fear, because ideally, when from BL's point of view, the grid in certain points can only take so much generation, right?
Yes.
And particularly what you call intermittent generation. And so having the regulation that speaks towards licensing and consent, this also allows the utility to understand how many generation points they have probably in one zone or one feeder. So it also feeds into the total concept of a sustainable grid. And so, yes, it is a fair statement.
Right, because my understanding is that it grows. I mean, the more households that you're adding on, the more supply is being available, right? It's more available.
That's a fair assessment, Dion. And I just want to make the point that as it relates to the rate, and we want to distinguish the rate from the fees associated. The rate, as what we spoke about earlier, what the PUC implemented and approved was a sandbox. So Sandbox is a tool that's implemented worldwide, and we implemented this model.
For the benefit again of the audience, what is a sandbox? It's a trial, it's a pilot, what is it?
Right, it's a regulatory tool, which is basically like a sampling or a testing of a design.
So we're testing it out, so to speak.
Yes.
And it's allowing us to see if we like, if we don't like,
exactly,
what we change, what we don't change.
Exactly.
So is it fair to say, and this is from the benefit for the private sector, that this is the opportunity where you observe and see what changes can be made for improvement if necessary?
Well, that is being done, because when the PUC made its decision, it also ordered that the utility BEL file with us quarterly reports reporting on the number of customers, persons who have approached them, and so that is ongoing, and we are receiving those reports, and by the end of maybe the next annual review proceeding, which would be by June of this year, we would be able to know what changes to make, what changes to come, and so forth.
So coming full circle, because we're about to wrap up, I'm going to ask for closing comments from each of you, but as we come to the close, if I am sitting down at home and I want to follow Mr. Rosado Limited's example, and I want to do this for my household or for my small business, where do I go? What do I do? Who do I talk to? Do I come to you at the PUC?
Definitely. Visit the PUC or visit the PUC's website for more information. You as the individual or as the household, you make the decision as to what you want for yourself, and we can guide you on that and walk you through the process and the steps.
Excellent. Well, guys, this has been an excellent conversation and a good exchange. I'm running out of my energy pun, so I'm going to leave it right there. Right?
You're low on energy.
Huh?
You're low on energy.
I like that one. No, so with that, I want to ask you guys for closing comments. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Kelly, then move over to you, Mr. Rosado, and then close off with you, Ms. Greenidge. So anything that this conversation has not covered that you think the viewers at home need to make sure that they walk away with after listening to this program?
I think the conversation was very comprehensive, and so there's not much that I didn't cover. But the main thing is, at least the main concept of the discussion, is that the electricity sector is now open. And I don't want people to just think that, oh, it's for me to put power on my rooftop and sell to the grid. You have to think outside the box, right? For example...
Outside the sandbox or just the box? Go ahead.
They keep the puns coming, right? So you have to think outside the box. Ideally, we keep on saying that we want to see sustainable development in the country. We want to see more jobs. We want to see... we want to be more competitive in the world. How do we do that? We do that by working with each other. We need to understand that there's different processes that's being undertaken, and how do we fit into those processes. So for example, students coming out of university level, maybe sixth form, maybe they have a finance background, they may have a colleague that has probably a technical background. You can open a renewable energy business. Because now with this regulation, more people might want to apply. Because now they have an understanding that these are the conditions and terms and this is how it will work. And so there's more guidance for someone who would want to participate in this sector. So don't just look at it as, I want to put solar on my rooftop. Be innovative.
Fair point.
Right?
Fair point. Be innovative. And I think innovation brings me right over to you, Mr. Rosado. Closing comments.
Yeah, well, I just want to reiterate, thank you so much for having me on. I think it's been an amazing discussion. For me, just learning, and I'm sure the viewers did too. I mean, to close, I think it's worth emphasizing that the private sector and everyone in this room has the same goal: having a reliable, having a clean energy system. We all benefit from it, and I think great work has been done by the PUC and the ministry in that regard. I just hope that the private sector can continue to be involved as policies develop. We want the same thing as you.
All right, perfect. And to you?
Yes, this was an excellent discussion, Dion. As Mr. Kelly said, it's been comprehensive. At the PUC, we remain committed to fostering sustainable innovative solutions that align with Belize's national policies. And so this regulation, the electricity licensing and consent regulation, is one of many regulations that we have prepared and that we will be passing into law in order to further the national policies, to further clean energy, local generation of energy in Belize. So we remain committed to our mission at the PUC.
Right, so this regulation will be the driving force.
We're like about 7 now.
Snuck in another one. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this has been a riveting conversation. I'm hoping that the viewers have learned something. And coming over to you guys at home, as Ms. Green said earlier, visit the website to learn more about what's happening with the new licensing regime, how you can benefit from it, how you as the private sector can benefit from it, and become a part of the energy solution for the country. It has been a wonderful conversation, understanding where we're going in terms of energy. So we're looking forward to see good things. Until next time.
The Energy Exchange Show was funded by the European Union in partnership with the United Nations Development Programme, the Ministry of Public Utilities, Energy, Logistics, and E-Governance, the Ministry of Youth, Sport and Transport, and the Belize City Council.